Hi, Daisy and Eli. It's your Uncle Ari. Welcome back to Shapiro School.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't sound very excited to be here.
Yeah.
Things look a little different today, and I'm going to tell you why. When I was a kid, around this time of year, I would always say, can we please have class outside? It's so beautiful out. And the teachers would always say no. And I decided, because I'm the teacher, I can just decide we're going to have class outside. So welcome to your outdoor Shapiro School. I'm glad it's as beautiful and sunny in Seattle as it is here in Washington.
Yeah, I'm glad too. I would not want to sit around in the snow like it's snowing.
And I know that as we were setting up, a deer and a fawn ran by through your yard. And so I just want to let people watching know that if you get distracted, or if there's like a blur in front of the camera, a brown shaped blur, a brown is not a shape. Sorry, I'm a terrible teacher. Brown is a color. A brown colored blur in front of the camera, it's just a deer. They don't need to worry. Do you see one?
No.
Eli? No, just wrote it down
I
there.
think they came up and then they ran down because they saw it.
Probably
Okay.
won't. Who knows?
So, are you ready for is this week 9? Week 9 of your Shapiro School? Okay. So I want to tell people at home that, as usual, feel free to pause and have your own conversation. This week, it's going to be a little bit more me telling stories than it is like having a debate or discussion or asking questions, but I'm sure you will have questions anyway, and you should have your own conversation at home. So with all of that said, let's dive in. Did you know that I was the White House correspondent before I started doing what I'm doing now?
I think
Mostly.
at one of your Thanksgivings, I probably asked about your job if I was alive by then.
Yeah, you were alive by then. You were very young.
Yeah. So I probably asked about that because I was very curious. So probably how I found out.
So what do you think it means to be a White House correspondent? What do you think a White House correspondent does?
They cover the news at the White House and write articles and tell whatever news station they work at, in your case NPR, what's going on.
And Daisy, why do you think that's an important job? I mean, not to puff myself up and say I had an important job, but why is that a job worth doing?
I guess it's a lot of people know you.
Well, no, I mean, like, why is it important for the country? Why is it important that Americans know what's happening at the White House?
Well, because if there's going to be a leader, I guess, or a group of leaders, then a lot of people probably want to know what the leaders do. You can't really just pass a law and then nobody knows. Or if somebody's like moving away from the White House into their own house, you'd want to know. Like, it's not something, like one day you'd go, like, send a message and it wouldn't get to them. So, stuff like that.
You know, the president does so many important things. If the president says, I'm going to drop a bomb on North Korea, or if the president says, I'm going to shut down schools because of COVID-19, you need to have reporters there to tell the country, to tell Americans what the White House has decided and what the president is doing. And so that's what all the White House correspondents do. The flip side of it is it's such a controlled place where they give you such little snippets of information and people don't talk really freely about what they're doing very much. And so there's a criticism of White House correspondents that I'm going to tell you, okay?
Okay.
And the criticism is that White House correspondents are stenographers to power. Do you have any idea what that phrase means? Stenographers to power?
I know what to power means, but not stenographers.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any idea, Daisy?
No.
So a stenographer is a person who takes notes and transcribes and can then repeat it back. And so a stenographer is...
With like books or something written
Yeah,
down.
because like a stenopad is like a notepad where you write things down.
Yeah.
And so why would it be a criticism? Why would it be a little bit disparaging to say that a White House correspondent is a stenographer to power?
Because then it would just be like you're repeating back exactly what you're told.
That is exactly right. Instead of challenging and asking difficult questions and being skeptical and holding powerful people to account. On your worst days, you're just saying, well, today the president said this, today the president did that, and you're not really doing the kind of deep journalism work that can actually change the course of American history. Because at its best, I've told you what the job is like at its worst, but at its best, you're finding out important new information and telling it to people who need to understand what their leaders are doing and what impact that's having on their lives on a daily basis. So what questions do you have about what it's like to cover the White House?
When did you first meet President Obama? Like, had you met him before you went to the White House, or was that your first time?
The first time I met him, I had just started covering the White House maybe a month earlier, and they said, we're going to plan a happy hour for some of the White House staff to meet the press corps. That's what they called us, the press corps. And so it was in the evening, and it was a room in the White House where we weren't usually allowed to go, sort of like the big front entrance, because usually the press goes in the side entrance, and we're in the little press area, and we're not allowed to wander around freely. So we were in that big front entrance, and there were lots of tall tables, and people were having soda or beer or wine and chatting. And then the president came in, and he went from table to table to table, just sort of chatting with each group of reporters for about 5 minutes. And when he came to me, I said, I'm brand new here. And he said, well, what's it been like so far? And I said, you know, it's funny, Mr. President, I've never spent so much time and energy thinking about any one person as I spend thinking about you. I said, you know, I wake up in the morning and I say, what's President Obama doing today? And I go to sleep at night and I think, what's President Obama doing tomorrow? It's like, you're my single-minded focus now. And he said, well, I'm sorry to hear that. And that was the first time I ever talked to him. But I'll tell you another time that I really thought it made an impression on me, which was the first time I was on Air Force One, and he came to the back of the plane to answer reporter questions. And I included a story about this in the background reading. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I didn't include in that story was that when he came back, I was sitting at my chair, and he was standing right next to me, and so I was kind of looking up at him. And as I looked up at him, I saw razor bumps on his neck. Do you know what razor bumps are?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like bump
I know that.
Yeah,
you're
like,
not old enough to shave, but
yeah, when you shave and you like poke yourself, it swells up.
yeah, exactly. So I looked up and I saw razor bumps on his neck. And he was talking about really important things, like things that could impact the whole world, like big national policy things. But I was looking up at him and I thought, oh, this guy shaves just like everybody else on this plane. And this guy gets razor bumps just like everybody else on this plane. And even though he's one of the most powerful people in the world, he's still just a person. He's still just a human being, just like any of us.
Yeah.
That didn't make it into my story, but it shaped the way I thought about the job and the way I thought about the president.
I think it did. That might have been the Washingtonian one. I'm not sure.
He made a
Oh,
list.
you're right. I did. I forgot I did mention that. Oh, you're right. So, you know, not everybody who is a White House correspondent can fit on Air Force One. There isn't enough room for all of us. So do you have any guesses as to how they handle who gets to go?
The newest, or they let like each news station pick one?
Well, there's something called a pool. Any guesses what a pool is, what that means?
Like,
It's a giant tub filled with water.
Well, that's one meaning of pool, but this is different. Daisy, do you have any guesses?
is it a
balls?
group of people?
Yes, it is. And so the press pool is a group of people that includes one print reporter, one radio reporter, one TV camera person, one, well, anyway, you get the idea. There's like one person from each category. And so if I'm in the radio pool, then I get to be on Air Force One, but I have to record and share with all the other radio reporters whatever happens. because I'm the radio pooler there for all of the radio White House correspondents who can't be there. And so if the president comes to the back of the plane and I'm on the radio pool, then it's my job to record the audio of whatever he's saying and share that with all of the other radio people. So this is all part of understanding a story about the first time I was ever on Air Force One when President Obama came back to talk. And the story is, on that plane, I just had one job, you know? My only job was record anything newsworthy that happens and share it with the rest of the radio reporters, because I was the pool reporter, okay? So on Air Force One, they serve you a lot of food. It's good food too. And I remember that day on Air Force One, they served us spaghetti and tomato sauce. Maybe there were meatballs, I don't remember. My radio equipment was under the seat in front of me. And I had my table open and I had this plate of spaghetti and sauce right in front of me. And there was another, what?
That's not going to end well.
It's not going to end well. There was another reporter sitting next to me. And we didn't know that the president was going to come back and answer some of our questions. So I was happily eating my spaghetti and sauce when suddenly I saw the president walking towards us down the aisle. Now remember, I had one job, okay? My only job was to record the audio of what the president said. But the microphone that I would use to record that audio was under the seat in front of me, and I had a platter of spaghetti basically in my lap. So the president stopped right next to me. And I thought, well, let's see now. I could either lunge for my equipment and splatter the leader of the free world with marinara sauce, or I could not do the only thing that I'm supposed to be doing right now, which is record audio of the president talking. And I had this panic. I couldn't move to my side because there was a reporter there. I couldn't move to this side because the president of the United States was there. I couldn't go for my equipment because the marinara sauce was there. I was sweating and panicked. And I looked behind me and there was a TV person who had a big boom microphone that he was holding out. And he looked at me and he smiled and winked, which was his way of saying, it's okay, I got you. You can have the audio that I'm recording and use that and share that. And that story tells you something about the way the White House press corps works, which is something else that I mentioned in the Washingtonian interview, which is that even though we're all competing with each other, we're also all helpful to each other. And, you know, you often hear about like CNN versus MSNBC versus Fox News and all of the competition of the cable news channels. But the fact is the White House correspondents for all those channels are really friendly to each other and help each other out all the time, which is good because it's a really stressful job. What other questions do you have about the years that I spent covering the White House?
Like, kind of a simple question. How did it feel to know that you were going to be covering all the news for NPR about the president of the United States of America?
It feels like a big responsibility because, first of all, when you walk into the White House, you just feel the history of that place. And you know how many people have walked into that building before you and the decisions that were made in that building and the proud tradition of journalists and staff and presidents that have all been in that building that now you're a part of. But also it feels like you're part of a team because I was one of 3 NPR White House correspondents. There was me, Mara Eliason, and Scott Horsley. And the thing NPR did that I think was really smart was each week, one of us would physically be in the White House. And that week, our job was to report on the daily news. Today, here's the thing that's happening. But then for the other 2 weeks, when our colleague was in the White House, we would be able to take a step back and report bigger stories that took a little more time, that required a little more thought, that wasn't just, here's what happened today, here's what happened the next day, here's what the president said. And so that, you know, sometimes covering the White House can feel like you're sprinting on a treadmill all the time. You know what I mean when I say that?
Yeah.
Like you're just trying to keep up and there's so much happening and it's like you're drinking from a fire hose and there's too much water. And so being able to be in the White House for 1 week and then out of the White House, but still reporting on what the president is up to for the other 2 weeks helped a lot. But I remember my editor, when I started covering the White House, my editor said, if you ever walk up to Air Force One and you don't feel that thrill, that sense of awe, that sense of history, then it's time for you to move on and do a different job. I think I once gave you some M&Ms from Air Force One that had the Air Force One seal and the president's signature on them.
I feel like you did.
Yeah. I don't remember it, but maybe you probably did.
It's funny because when I started covering the White House, every flight I would take on Air Force One, I would save every napkin and I would save every seat card. And then after 4 years of doing it, I would wipe my face with the napkins and not even think about it. You know, the napkins say aboard Air Force One, aboard the presidential aircraft. But there's something else I want to tell you about flying on Air Force One. As journalists, we operate under the principle that we can't accept free gifts from the people who we're reporting on. Why do you think that might be?
Because then you could get, you could become like a friend of that person. You could, and like that's not a problem, except if you're reporting, because then you'll have a biased view, and you won't be reporting on every view. You'll just be reporting on the view that you think is right.
That's exactly right. Daisy, what do you think?
Well, my mom's a therapist and it's not allowed in therapy either, or at least the therapy she does, because it's like you can't like start a relationship and you don't really want to get to know each other, and it's not really like logical, especially when you're working.
You know, those are both really good answers. I mean, as a journalist, if we take free things from the people we're reporting on, we might hesitate to report stories that make those people look bad. You know, let's imagine that I'm doing a story about your next door neighbor. And your next door neighbor, what's that?
Let's just call them Bob Jones.
Bob Jones. And Bob Jones bakes me a gorgeous cake or buys me a new car. And then I find out that Bob Jones has actually been stealing things. I might say, well, but he gave me that really nice cake or that new car. I don't want to report a story that makes it sound like he's stealing things, so maybe I'm going to skip that story. Or just people listening to my reports on the radio will say, how can I trust him to be fair when he's getting free stuff from Bob Jones? His stories about Bob Jones are going to make Bob Jones look good because he gets free stuff from him, obviously. So this is all a big buildup to flying on Air Force One. A flight on Air Force One is a pretty nice gift, right? Especially if we're flying to Afghanistan. I mean, to get a free flight to Afghanistan, that's a big gift. So what do you think we do to solve that problem?
You don't. I have no idea. Absolutely no idea.
Daisy, do you have any guesses?
Well, I guess you can think I would have been paid more if I didn't get this free flight.
Well, the answer is every time we fly on Air Force One, my company, NPR, or every news organization that flies on Air Force One pays the White House the cost of a first-class plane ticket to wherever we're flying. So if we join the president and the president is going from Washington, D.C. to Ohio, we figure out the cost of a first-class plane ticket, not coach, because Air Force One is not like a coach flight. And we pay the cost of a first-class plane ticket from Washington, D.C. to Ohio, or Washington, D.C. to Afghanistan. So flying on Air Force One is fun, but it's not free. It costs a lot of money.
Definitely.
Yeah. Speaking of Afghanistan, what did you think about the story about my flight with the president to a war zone?
I actually had a question about the comic.
Oh, yeah? About the what?
The comic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well,
That was
right?
in Iowa. Right.
Do you still have it?
I do. Of course I saved that comic. Yeah. I have it at my office.
Oh.
And someone also had a question about that, and someone else had a question about what was it like traveling to the war zone. Daisy, you want to read this?
Oh, this is a question that came through on Twitter?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, should we just read those two?
And these are all anonymous
Yeah.
people.
Okay.
Read the questions.
Okay, I think this came from a 5th grader in Berkeley. Is that right?
Oh. We didn't see any names.
Okay. So what were the questions?
Were you surprised at the cover of Barack the Barbarian?
Absolutely, because you think of the president as somebody who wears a suit and tie, and the cover of this comic had him shirtless with big muscles, which, you know, Barack Obama doesn't have big muscles. He likes to say that he's kind of a wiry string bean. He's a basketball player, not a big burly wrestler. And so the comic, like any comic book does, made him look a little bit exaggerated.
And the other one was, what was it like traveling with the president in a country that the U.S. was at war with?
Right. So when I went with the president to Afghanistan, it was a top secret trip. And I only found out about it 2 days before. And I was allowed to tell my editor and no one else. We didn't have a single phone conversation about it. We didn't send a single email about it because it was such a top secret trip.
Because if Afghanistan knew about it, they could like intercept the plane or something.
Right. I mean, any president is going to be a big target. And so usually when we would fly with the president on Air Force One, we could take some kind of a taxi or a car service to Andrews Air Force Base where the airplane leaves from. But this time we weren't allowed to. We had to drive our own cars. I don't have a car, so I had to go with somebody else who was on the trip who did have a car. And so we arrived in the middle of the night, and we took off around midnight. And usually when we showed up at Andrews Air Force Base, Air Force One would be out on the runway, on the tarmac. But this time it was in the hangar because they didn't want people to see the airplane out and know the president was going somewhere. So we were in the hangar.
Did you not even tell NPR? Like, did NPR not even know?
I could tell one person at NPR. One person, which was my editor, my boss. No one else. And usually when we're traveling with the president, we get on Air Force One and then we hear the president is coming. So we get off the plane and we record audio or video of the president getting on the plane, and then we take off. But this time we weren't allowed to know when he was coming up. We had to keep the windows down as we were taking off. So, I mean, the window shades closed so that there was no light from the windows as we were taking off. And so we took off in total silence and secrecy at midnight, flew to the other side of the world in Afghanistan, which was a 13-hour trip. And when we landed, it was midnight in Afghanistan. So we touched down in the middle of the night, and then we were able to say, we're here. And so we called and we filed our stories, and the president was supposed to go from the airbase, Bagram Air Base, where we landed, to Kabul, the capital city, to meet with the president of Afghanistan. But he was going to take helicopters into Kabul, and there was too much wind and too many clouds. And so it was dangerous for him to fly into Kabul. And so we didn't even go to Kabul. We just stayed in Bagram Air Base the whole time. And that entire trip, we only spent about 3 hours on the ground. So then let me tell you the story about filing my piece for NPR. Oh, wait, did you have a question about that?
Were there still like flight attendants serving you food on the flight?
Yeah. Yeah, the crew that works on Air Force One is amazing. They take it very seriously, and you really get to know them over the years. If you're covering the White House year after year after year, you get to know the staff on Air Force One, and
Well, there's
they're
an
all
airplane
military.
going by right now. Wow.
You say an airplane is going by?
Yeah, right over our
What a
house.
coincidence.
Probably not Air Force One, but maybe. The president is traveling today, but I don't think he's traveling to Washington State.
Look like that. Yeah, it's a blue plane, but like white.
It's white with a blue streak.
So when you're in the air on Air Force One, there's no Wi-Fi. And so I had to file my story during a short refueling stop in Germany. So we were on the ground in Afghanistan for 3 hours. And then the plan was we would fly from Afghanistan to Germany. We would refuel, and that's when I would file my story. And then we would fly back to the United States. And by the time we landed in the United States, my story already would have been on the air. Okay? So we touched down in Germany. I've written my story on the plane. We touch down in Germany. They say, we're going to be here for an hour. I say, okay. So I call my editor. We run through the story. We edit the story. He says, it sounds good. I say, okay. So I upload all of the clips, the sounds, the tape, but then I have to record my actual part of the story, right? So I sit in my chair and I start recording the story, but somebody's having a conversation right next to me and it's picking up on the mic. So it's no good. So I go to a different seat and I start recording again. And somebody else is talking and it's making too much noise. So finally, I go into the bathroom on Air Force One. And I put down the toilet lid and I start recording in the bathroom. And as I'm recording, I feel a sort of vibration. And I'm like, we have another 30 minutes here on the ground in Germany. This vibration is definitely not the plane moving. It's definitely not moving.
Oh,
And
was
then
it flashing?
no, the vibration picked up a little more. And I was like, I know this plane is not taking off right now. And then it was picking up a little more. And then I thought, oh no, this plane is taking off. And I haven't filed my story yet. And so I'm recording my piece and I'm trying not to let the panic that I'm feeling get into my voice. And I finally finish recording and I bust out of the bathroom and Air Force One is rocketing down the runway. And I run into my seat and I open my laptop to upload the recording. And of course, at this point, I've been kicked off of the Wi-Fi. And so I have to reconnect the Wi-Fi. And the plane starts getting its nose up in the air. And I know that I can file this story until we hit 10,000 feet. And once we hit 10,000 feet, we're done. So we're in the air and I'm uploading my recording and it says like 15% uploaded, 33% uploaded. We are in the air. It says like 52% uploaded, 75% uploaded. And finally we're like hitting the clouds and it says uploaded. And then I closed my laptop and I exhaled a deep breath and I asked the flight attendants for a cookie.
You earned it.
There was one more question from the subscribers, or the same person actually.
Yeah.
But should we read that quick?
Sure, go for it.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how surprised were you when you found out about the hawks and rodents?
Yeah, it's crazy. You know, you think of the White House as a place where the president lives. You don't think of it as a place where hawks live. But technically, the White House is a national park. And it's actually pretty big. And there are these big old trees. And so living in Washington, D.C., you know, we often see hawks around Washington, D.C. So after I saw the hawks at the White House, I thought, well, maybe that's not such a surprise after all. It makes sense.
Wow.
So like 2, not very surprised, but kind of surprised.
Well, at first I was surprised. At first
Like
I would say it was like a 6 or a 7. But then after I thought about it, I was like, okay, this makes more sense.
Like a 1 or a 2.
Like a 1 or a 2 after I stopped to think about it for a while. Speaking of hawks and rodents, have any deer wandered by during our lesson?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
They got scared.
Do you have any other questions about what it's like to cover the White House?
Yes. Like, were you staying in a hotel, or were you staying in your house, or did you ever like actually stay in the White House?
I never stayed overnight in the White House, although I did work some very, very late nights. When we travel with the president overnight, there is a pool hotel where the people who are in the press pool that we talked about stay, and that's the same hotel the president is in. And then the rest of the press corps usually stays in a different hotel.
That makes sense.
So
Because
one
the entire
thing,
press corps would not probably be able to fit in the White House, even though it's huge.
yeah. So one thing that White House reporters sometimes get criticized for that I think is worth talking about is using anonymous sources. Do you know what anonymous sources are?
Yeah.
Yeah.
People who don't
How would you explain that?
people who don't say who they are for because they either don't want to get punished for saying stuff that someone doesn't want them to say, or just don't think it's a good idea to say contradictory stuff that a lot of people would disagree
I
with.
think I would explain anonymous, like, supporters, I guess, as people who do something that they help contribute, but they prefer to remain unknown because they don't, it can be for several reasons, and probably one of the main ones is that they don't really want to share their word with the public, I guess.
Yeah, those are exactly right. Now, why would people criticize reporters for using anonymous sources? Why would that be something people would get upset about?
Because they were like, we should know who's giving us this information. It could be someone in like a huge gang that has done a lot of bad stuff, and we don't know if they're anonymous.
Yeah, I mean, somebody who's anonymous could be lying, right? If my name is attached to something, I'm going to be held accountable for what I say. But if nobody knows that I'm the one saying it, I can kind of say whatever I want and there's no accountability, right?
Unless someone's recording your thing and they can hear your voice, but
well,
no.
Right. So if there's no accountability and somebody who's anonymous can say whatever they want, why do you think White House correspondents and other reporters too would ever use anonymous sources?
Because sometimes they're the only sources.
And also sometimes you can verify what those sources are telling you, so you know that they're not lying.
And also in like the one with the family of 4, going back to the border thing, they were staying anonymous because they didn't want to, like, because they didn't want to be arrested.
Like
that's right. You're referencing our immigration conversation.
Yeah.
Good memory. Yeah.
But they weren't like lying. They just didn't want to be arrested.
That's exactly right. But I'm going to tell you something that happens a lot on the White House beat is that often people who are experts but not the most senior top person in their part of the government will be assigned to talk to reporters about their area of expertise without using their name. And so it's not like, oh, I'm going to tell you about something that I could get in trouble for. It's like, well, the president said I should tell you all about what's going to happen on this trip, but he doesn't want my name attached to it. And so the White House often will decide.
Another airplane, wow.
Another airplane.
Yeah.
So the White House will often decide that somebody who's talking to reporters should do it without using their name. And then the White House will say, how dare you publish things without using a person's name and rely on anonymous sources. But White House correspondents know that that's how it works, and so they're used to it.
So the White House isn't actually mad at you, they just have to say that?
Yeah. They're trying to score political points. Do you have other questions about what it was like for those 4 years that I was covering the White House?
No, not really. Not any that you haven't already.
I guess, how well and like how long did you spend with the president? Or how well did you get to know the president, and like how long did you spend?
I didn't spend a lot of time with him, but I did feel like over the 4 years I did get to know him. Actually, this is a funny story that we could end on. In press conferences, when the president takes questions from reporters, he'll often get a list of the names of reporters that are sitting there in the room so that he can call on them by name. And he would say, Daisy from NPR, you can have the next question. And so for years, whenever he would call on me at a press conference, he would mispronounce my name. He would call me Ari. And finally, when I was getting ready to leave the White House beat and move to London and be a foreign correspondent, on my very last press conference, he called on me and he said, I had mentioned something to some of the staff in the press office about how he always mispronounces my name. And he said, well, because it's your last White House press conference, I'll say your name right. Ari, why don't you take this question? Well, thanks for a great conversation, and thanks for letting me relive some of these memories. I hope you enjoyed your outdoor Shapiro school for the day.
We did.
All right. It's great to see you.
Bye.
Have a good week. Bye.